Hey, back in better than ever. A little Jack theology. It's good to be here.
That's a great description for us. I like that. Back and better than ever. I don't know. I don't know if it's true or not, but I like it.
There we go. Yeah, getting older. As of this recording, it's your birthday. So
Yeah,
happy
absolutely.
birthday.
I am now 47. So, like a fine wine, I keep aging. I don't know if I keep aging well. I don't know if my value goes up the older that I get, but this is what it is, right?
Yeah. The older you get, the more pain you get. Before went we started recording, we were talking about some injuries. So uh, definitely the older you get, the more things hurt. And
Yeah,
I
you
find
just
that
hurdles, right? Just work around things.
Yeah, I find that like some injuries are just inexplicable. Like, how did this happen? But I have no idea. But I'm in pain, so I will deal with it. Um, yeah. So today, yeah, a bit of a shameless plug to like, subscribe, share, all those things. Feel free to comment, ask questions as well. We'd love to hear some comments and questions from those who listen. We do monitor all the socials to see what comes of it. And yeah, today we wanted to talk about just advice or things we've learned from pastoring. I think we're both in our 40s. We've both been at this 20 plus years, so we've learned a lot, experienced a lot. Um, and as we were talking last week, it came up that it might be a good thing to do. And so, yeah, thought we'd dive into that.
I think this is easy. We
Um,
could do this one really quickly, right? Advice to young pastors: don't.
don't do it.
All right. Well, let's move
All
on to the after
right.
show.
All right.
But we know you're not going
Oh,
to listen
man.
to us, right? So you've already done it, or you're going to do it even if we say don't do it. So we might as well try to,
Yeah.
give you some advice that you're going to disagree with now, but at some point maybe look back on and say, maybe that was wiser than I thought it was at the time.
Yeah. No, yeah. I remember listening to stuff like this when I was a young pastor, and I remember it now. Yeah. I'm like, they were right. They were right. Um yeah, so where to begin? I I
Well,
think I
okay,
actually
I know you keep wanting to talk, but
no.
I think you pointed out something really great there is the need to be teachable. And I think that maybe, at the very beginning, that's something that is maybe important and difficult the younger that we are, is being teachable. And I think young people think they're teachable. And I know I thought I was teachable when I was young, but I was only teachable by people who I respected, who I agreed with, or who were telling me what I wanted to hear. And maybe out of the starting gate, it could be helpful for us to say sometimes being teachable means listening and learning from people who you completely disagree with. And feel like you have nothing in common from or with. So yeah, okay, there you go.
No, yeah, that
On
is a
into the
good place
plan
to
that you
start.
had.
No, that's I have no plan.
Oh, good. Well,
um,
here we go. The wheels are off. Let's just roll.
that is a good place to start. Yeah, being really teachable. I think everybody likes to be teachable, and one of the ways I think you could posture yourself that way is to ask good questions. Yesterday, I spent an afternoon with a young pastor. He's just finishing Bible school, and I got the sense from him he was teachable because he asked good questions. He was genuinely curious. He never met me before. We had a mutual friend, but he was definitely curious about certain things, and I felt like he was listening. So I felt like he was teachable, and I think he wanted to learn from me. Whatever nugget I was able to give him, I'm sure he took with him. And so yeah, I think that's important. I agree. There was times when I wasn't very teachable as a young pastor. I thought I knew better than everybody else and was smarter than everybody else, and I think that was definitely a mistake, because it's, even if you end up being right, it doesn't really. People kind of are aware of your arrogance and ego, and then it doesn't really help you. So, um, posturing and walking with humility is a big thing, and it'll help you in the long run, and it'll save a lot of heartache as well. Um, I had a lot of hard conversations in the early days from bosses and mentors who were trying to help me, and I was being resistant. So, um, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. I think recognizing your deficiencies is important. And oftentimes that comes with age and probably other people recognizing your deficiencies and beating you to a pulp over where you're deficient, and you eventually just relent and like, yeah, okay, I recognize that this is not my strong suit. When you're young, the sooner you can learn where your deficiencies and where your weak spots are and admit them to yourself, I think is super important, because all of us, I think, come into ministry with something of an ego, but especially something of an ego, maybe a bit of a self-righteousness, but also a drive to fix something or to right some wrong. I don't know that most people get into ministry for the wrong reasons. Maybe some people do. It's just all about narcissism. It's all about control. I think for a lot of people, there's narcissism that's there, but it's not the primary reason for going into ministry. Maybe other things are there as well, but recognizing where your emotional weak spots are, I think, and relational weak spots are, is important. We all have them. Find a therapist, find a spiritual director, somebody who very early on is going to begin to have conversations with you to help point those things out. The earlier you learn them, it's going to save you a whole lot of difficulty later on in ministry. But I think also too, whenever we get into ministry, a lot of us have been in church for a long time, and so we're trying to right some wrong. Maybe that's a theological wrong, maybe that's a practical wrong that the church is doing in its practice and worship or in its engagement with community. Maybe it's social justice, maybe it's, I don't know. But recognizing where you are deficient and where your weaknesses are in those areas as well, I think is important for somebody young to understand, because you may think that your strength is theology, but oftentimes our strength is our greatest weakness. And the fact that you think you're right and you know everything about theology is going to become your biggest weakness in growth and working with people. The fact that you think you're right in how worship should be done, and how churches should be operated is going to be your biggest weakness 5 or 10 years down the road, when everything changes and there's a whole new thing that contemporary or that's new, and you're unwilling to change or unable to change because you have this mindset that the way I think and the way I do it is right, and I'm not lacking in understanding or knowledge there. So I guess seeing the blind spots and allowing other people to point them out to you is not always easy for a pastor, because we tend to get really tied into the work that we do. It's us. It's not our job. It's who we are in a lot of ways, and that's a whole other unhealthy conversation. But recognizing it, I guess, is a starting place for ensuring that you don't have more trouble than you need to.
Yeah, you hit on a couple things that were on my mind in that. The first, I think a young pastor, you need to know yourself, and like you said, the journey is long, and I think we're both still in our 40s, and I think we're still kind of figuring that out in some respects, and maybe in a lot of respects it is a lifelong journey. But what I see in a lot of young pastors, and I know I fell into this, is they just want to mimic pastors they look up to, maybe the pastor they grew up with, or a celebrity pastor,
Matt Chandler,
and they
Mark
think,
Driscoll,
yeah,
John
yeah,
MacArthur.
yeah, yeah, they think that's what I need to be, and that's what I'm going to be, and that's a huge mistake, because there's only one of them and there's one of you, and you're very unique. You have a unique gift and talent to bring to the table, and the sooner you find that out, the better. And the only way you find that out is by trying things. But don't just think because, yeah, Matt Chandler was mine. Just because you think Matt Chandler is a great communicator, and that you're naturally just going to be that, right? Um, and so you probably can do things Matt Chandler can't, and that's great. And you need to figure out what those things are. So yeah, knowing yourself's huge, and then kind of knowing even beyond your ministry skills, but knowing who you are at your core, so that no matter what role that you have, in the church, outside the church, you can still live that calling, that identity out in a variety of different ways. So, um, yeah, figuring that out, Kevin, you did a great job listing a lot of things like that that could help with that. But yeah, start that journey to know yourself, and then knowing ministry. You brought this up too. Is like I know better, and a lot of times guys go to seminary and read books, and they like what they see on paper, right?
Yeah.
And everybody's got Mike Tyson. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? Um, and so, young pastor, understand you're going to get punched in the mouth. That philosophy of ministry you read about from Rick Warren
Over and over and over again. Yeah.
it is not going to work for you. It's just not going to work for you. So don't think you know it all. I love how you said that, and I think that's an important piece of advice. Is I definitely walked into my first ministry role telling my 55-year-old senior pastor who'd been in ministry for 30 years that I knew a better way of discipleship than he did because I read a book in seminary.
What is it? I've come to say it takes about 10 years to beat the seminary out of somebody. I
Yeah.
think some churches have a really great talent for beating seminary out of young pastors. It's a gift. I don't know that they do it intentionally, but church.
Yeah.
Um, I love what you said about the journey is long. And what is it? You and I both have a mutual friend who went through a doctoral program with us, Nate, who says, the art of the long lens. And I thought that was just such a great metaphor for looking at so many things in life, but especially pastoring as well. That, the goal is obviously that you have enough steam in the tank in order to run that well, for as long as you're called to do it or want to do it. And that doesn't happen for a lot of pastors. And I think, for many of us, we think, well, the reason that doesn't happen is because they have some sort of a failure, an ethical failure, a moral failure, a sexual failure. For a lot of pastors, though, it isn't that. It's that they weren't healthy enough to survive the churches that they were placed in, the congregations that they were placed in. For others, it's just that they decide that the things that they have to sacrifice in order to get there just aren't worth the price that they're paying to do that. And for somebody who has planned, I think, to do this for the rest of their life and then come to a place 10, 20, 30 years later where it's like, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. That's a huge wake up call and a huge life crisis there for a lot of folks. And I think early on, if I would have, for me, I guess I did because I never really wanted to be in ministry. So I got in pastoring a lot later than a lot of other folks. I try to do other things first. So for me, I always kind of have held loosely to pastoring. But for a lot of folks, it's their identity. They go into it. It's what they've always wanted to do. It's where they've always been headed. And whenever that crisis hits, it can be really debilitating. And I think that it needs to be said that you don't have to be a pastor your entire life. There can be a second life and a second career after ministry and after pastoring. And in fact, it may be wise to hold so loosely to this role as to think to yourself, I'm going to be okay. And maybe it's a good thing for me to consider that I don't have to do this. I understand this idea of a call, but I don't think that God's going to call you to be abused so much that you lose who you are, that you lose your salvation in the process. So I think holding loosely to it is good for both you and for the church and for your future. Um, yeah, I don't know how you feel about that, but I see a lot of folks who don't do that and end up having a lot of trauma because of it that maybe they didn't need.
Yeah, I think that's great. Um, you know, Saint Ignatius talks about that, holding everything in life loosely, like your palms open. And I think that's important, especially the role of pastor, your role at your church, whatever that is, to definitely hold it loosely. I think part of the reason pastors burn out, if you will, and seek to move on is because they don't take care of themselves, especially emotionally. taking the Sabbath, taking rest, making sure that's a discipline in your life is very important. Um, and like a real rest where you get away, you completely check out from everything and do some hobby, lift weights, go for a run, get your energies out um, somewhere else. And that's important because I think a lot of pastors do get to second careers not because they held it loosely, because they held everything so tightly
Yeah.
that they just burst and they had no choice but to get
Yeah.
out.
I see a lot of folks who
So,
make it their identity, right?
yeah,
They're everything that they've ever wanted, everything that they are is being a pastor. And I love what you said there about getting out, finding other things, to do, defining yourself in ways that are additional to, I think, being a pastor is important to accomplishing what you just said. I love that.
yeah. So Sabbath, I think too. One of the things I was thinking about, I've been thinking about a lot over the last year that they don't teach you in seminary is a couple things. One, as a pastor, you really are mostly managing conflict. uh, you in seminary, you think, oh, I'm going to implement this great philosophy of ministry, and I'm going to
It's about
do all these
ministry and
great things.
teaching and preaching,
Yeah,
right? And that's like
yeah,
un piquito, like.
yeah, yeah. That's very small portion of what we actually do. Um,
And it's the
and
least
so
amount
that,
of effect you have too on people. I mean, just frankly, you
yeah,
think that the teaching and the preaching and the leadership is going to be what changed lives, but really, I think you're right. It's like the conflict management. It's when you are in the shit show with the sheep who are slinging shit at each other. I think is really honestly where most of your actual ministry work. There's a metaphor. There's a middle image. I think you're right though. Is where
that's
is where
that's
you're.
actually that's actually what it is.
It's just
I'm just
monkeys out there
picturing
slinging poop at each other.
the shepherd in the middle of the poop slinging. Like, what are you doing? What are you? They're covered in poop. Everybody's good.
And what always
That's
happens
funny.
invariably is it's the shepherd that's the problem, right? Is that, so then everybody is like, oh, well, it's not the other side. It's you that's the problem. So then they start slinging it at you. And, then it's
Yeah.
the shit show.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. Because you're just managing conflict and you're managing people who aren't healthy and aren't well adjusted, and you likely, because of that, aren't well adjusted and healthy. Yeah, they're gonna start slinging mud at you. You're gonna hear things you never thought you'd hear. You're gonna get, we both experienced that, just
Yeah.
getting railroaded, and
Yeah.
we're just trying to, you're just standing there. I'm just trying to help you, and people don't see it that way, and they don't.
Yeah. And this is one of the mistakes that I made. If I'm looking back as a pastor, I would say that one of the primary mistakes that I made in the two major traumatic situations of conflict that I was in churches was leaving too early in those conflicts. Now, I will say that, circumstances, I made the right decision for me. I made the right decision for my family. And I certainly felt release from God in leaving and saying, this is far beyond the call of duty. This has gotten so out of line that there's probably not much more that I can do here without the sacrifice being far too great and unnecessary. And I'm just not willing or able in one circumstance to do it because of where I was mentally, what it had done and what that church had done to me. But at the end of the day, in both of those situations, my leaving was not what was best for those congregations. And now after, following the trajectory of those churches, one, I think for the 15 or 16 years now, and another one for 5, 6, 7 years now, that was not what was in the best interest of the church. And I wish I had had the steam in the tank. I wish I had had the ability. I wish I had stayed and seen it through to see what had happened, rather than in both situations kind of falling on my sword, walking away and saying, I'm leaving you with God. In some ways, God had left them with me, and I should have seen it through, I think. it's not a perfect thing. I wish I could go back and live those moments knowing now what I knew then or what I didn't know then. And I think I would have fought longer and fought harder and still probably would have sunsetted 6 months later, a year and a half later, and said, okay, I it's time for me to go, or it's time for you to go from me. But in both of those moments when I left, unfortunately, I don't think that the churches were in healthy enough places to survive. And I wish I'd stayed just a little bit longer in those places to finish the job of making sure that they were healthy enough to not run themselves into the sand and never be able to pull themselves out of it.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson is you are dealing with a bunch of unhealth. You're dealing with folks who don't understand the church. They don't understand our calling as pastors. Um, for most of them, they see the church as a business, and so they're thinking, business like. They're thinking how they are in their corporate kind of setting if they're in corporate, and so there's just different dynamics there. There's different levels of unhealth spiritually. There's power plays because a lot of folks get on boards and they feel, most of them don't have any sort of sense of power anywhere else except for there, and so they, unhealthily use that. And so I would say, as a pastor, I wouldn't worry about anything ministry related other than like, how do I help my leaders become spiritually healthy? Like, I would, if I had to do it over again, I would start there.
That's
You know, I,
fascinating.
I yeah, I've done the opposite where I start with like, some ministry changes, discipleship, structure changes, and then I realized people aren't healthy for the changes. They're not ready for that, and they lash out and they, come after you, and so I think if I had to do it over again, is just I would step back and just invest in their spiritual health, and then over time as they get healthy, make some of those ministry changes you think need to be made.
I really love that,
Um,
Matt. I think that I'm sitting here like taking notes, thinking, wow, I wish I had done more of that. And I don't even know if in a next season of ministry in an institutional church, if that ever happens, I don't know that I would have done what you just said, even now without having heard you say it. But the drive, I think, in churches, especially in new pastors coming in, for growth, for saying, we want the kids to come back, we want the young families to come back, we want our children's ministry to grow, we need to meet budget, we want to hire this, the drive for practical ministry that's on pastors is enormous, especially the drive that they put on themselves to not be a failure, and that we metric failure by measures like attendance and giving and buildings and things like that. I just think you just said something that was radically important, that we refocus on discipleship rather than those things. And in the end, we have to lead the church to understand what true success looks like, and that the metrics for that are far different than what far and away almost every pastoral call, at least in US America, looks like these days, because it's more about growth and less about discipleship.
yeah, that's the crux of it, right? Um is the growth mindset. Like, we just had a board meeting last night, and it's like, like you just mentioned all the things, right, of what boards want. My board's no different, and it's like, uh you make bad decisions when you just are so focused on, we need numbers, right? We need an increase
Yeah.
in giving, we need an increase in butts and seats.
And it's not
You
wrong,
compromise things. No,
right? I mean, we
no,
want those things because we want, people to come into a relationship with the church, because we believe that coming into a relationship with the church means that in some way, shape, or form, they're going to come into a relationship with Christ, with God. So, the
yeah,
heart is definitely there behind it, but it's hard to blame boards because they're not coming from a context of seminary. They're not coming from a context of pastoring. They're coming from their real world context where everything that they hear day in and day out is all about metrics and widgets and measures and best practices and growth. And so they're bringing that into the church, saying, I can bring these things into the church that I know and that I'm good at and that I understand to help the church utilize and do these things better, to do its job better. And it feels, as a pastor, like you're running upstream, like you're pressing against the grain to say, no, it's not that those things are unimportant, but the best thing that we can do is something that is spiritual here with us. And I just, you blew my mind, but I'm totally seeing the wisdom behind what you're saying and how hard that would be for some pastors, especially young pastors, to look guys who and women who are 30 years your senior, sometimes 40 years your senior on a board, who have been in that church 40, 50 years, and you've been in that church 40 or 50 days, and say, yeah, no, we're not going to spend this board meeting talking about budgets. We're going to spend this board meeting talking about Second Timothy, or whatever it
Yeah,
is.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, I think
yeah,
when your priorities shift, like, you know,
like what are we
it's
doing
like,
though? Like what are we doing?
yeah, you can't. Well, Jesus, even, I mean, rich young ruler, I just preached about it. The rich young ruler is like, I kept all of these things, right? I
Hey, you
kept
must
the
be on the
law.
lectionary.
Yeah, I am. I kept the law, right? I'm good. And then Jesus says, but give me everything. Give me your heart, is what he's asking for. And so, what I think Jesus is saying is like, to follow Jesus, I need your heart, and this other stuff will come. So we make, like, let's focus on our leaders' hearts, the church's hearts, to focus them on Jesus. The rich young ruler, help them give all their hearts to Jesus. That other stuff will come. The growth will come. The money will come as those people grow. Um, what I know for a fact is when you focus on just the numbers, it is definitely. I mean, there's so much data out there, and Mark Driscoll is a glaring case. Um, I know his stuff well. Like that, when you just focus on the numbers, butts and seats and budgets, the heart doesn't grow, and then everything implodes literally. And there's like a 12-episode, 15-episode series podcast about that very thing. And so I think that's what tends to happen. I think that's what young people, and I've seen it on smaller scale too, where I was working with lots of young pastors just 5 or 6 years ago in my denomination, and we saw it over and over again. And the pastors that thrived and did well were the ones that focused on that spiritual growth, that spiritual health of their leadership. And of course, they were still doing ministry. It wasn't like the only thing they were doing is having little small Bible studies with their leaders, but that was their focus. That's what they measured. That's what they prioritized. And I think for them at long term, it was so much healthier way to do it. And I, looking back, wish that I had postured myself that way. But I was, I wanted to be Mark Driscoll, Matt Chandler, and you know that's what you did. Launch big, launch hard. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean
So the
the
metrics.
American church is in crisis. The American church is in crisis. It has been for a really long time. And unfortunately, what it is tending to do is doubling down on the things that put it in crisis in the first place. And this is one of those things. It's focusing on a business growth model of the church that builds some churches big, but doesn't build disciples or followers of Christ. Uh,
Yeah.
Got to find
Well,
a
yeah.
different way.
What's the Willow
Oh my
study?
gosh.
The
Which one? Reveal?
the one reveal. Yeah, yeah. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, I mean the biggest mega church business. I mean, they literally did church as business as their model, and credit to them, they did the survey and realized this actually isn't doing what we thought it was doing, and so they,
It wasn't fulfilling their mission,
yeah,
which was fully devoted followers of Christ.
yeah.
Had a
To me,
lot of people in the building, had a
yeah,
lot of people attending things, had a great budget, but they realized it wasn't creating fully devoted followers of Jesus. And they said, we got to fix that.
Yeah. Um, so that's a big one. That's hard. It's hard to for pastors to put that aside, um, because you're evaluated on it so much. Excuse me. That denominations, they're the ones who they promote that stuff. The people that make it to the stages are the ones with the big budgets and buildings and numbers, and so it's just such ingrained in our culture that it's really hard to resist. But I think if you can resist it, um, do it. And model yourself. I mean, here's a real practical thing. Read Eugene Peterson. I mean, he was like so um, eye opening for me in learning how to be a pastor. I don't think I actually pastored for like the first 10 years of being a pastor, and and he opened my eyes to that. And being a pastor is really committing to being in obscurity. Like you just work the parish. I mean, I love that picture. That's such a brilliant picture of the sheep and the sheep pen with this, the shit getting thrown around. Like it's so good because that pastor covered in shit doesn't he's not going to be on TV, right? He's not going to be on the conference circuit. He doesn't have time for it. He's got crap all over him. And so, the young pastor that sets out and wants to be on the conference circuit, like some of these guys, it's not pastoring. It really is not. And I think Eugene kind of shows us the way in that.
Yeah, yeah, it's like
You
the
know,
difference, right, between part of the politics, but like a Trump and a Joe Biden. Like
well,
a Trump is a big personality, always out there in front, always needing to be kind of in the center of things, and there are positive things that come from that. Versus a Biden who is kind of behind the scenes more. You weren't hearing about him in the news every day, or if you want to go back, it's a Jimmy Carter a little bit versus a Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, big brash out front personality, and Carter very kind of different, low key, demeanor. Um, and you said, I think Eugene Peterson, advice to young pastors: if read Eugene Peterson, especially his stuff. Is it pastoring? Was that the book that was the primary one that you were talking about, or does he have another book that's specifically written
uh,
to? Um,
yeah, he has. Yeah, he has his biography, I guess,
okay, yeah,
called the
called the
pastor.
pastor.
Is
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, and Calvin Miller is another name that in the past many people would know of. Most people today, young pastors, aren't going to ever have heard of Calvin Miller, but Calvin Miller is another person who was kind of Eugene Peterson a generation ago. Calvin Miller has a book, I think, called Letters to a Young Pastor, or something like that. Read Calvin Miller, especially that book. And you bring up, I was thinking as you were talking, there are like three things that as a young pastor I did somewhat, wish I would have done more, but I see now the value in doing it for young pastors. One of them is intentionally, immediately creating some sort of a relationship with another pastor who is older than you. Somebody who's in their 60s, who's in their 70s, who's in their 80s. Probably the older the better. Even retired is fine, but having somebody who is way down the road ahead of you, who you can just be in a relationship with. If it's mentoring, great. If it's friendship, great. If it's just that they're there for you to ask, doesn't matter, but have that connection in place before you need it, because you are going to at some point need somebody outside of your circle and your context to invest in you because you're done, or to ask questions to because you have nowhere else to turn and no one that you trust. So build and invest in somebody who's older than you. Also, I would say begin to build and invest immediately in other pastors in your community as well before you need it to be there. Specifically, I would say, for Protestant pastors, building relationships with leaders in the Catholic community, in the Jewish community, in the Muslim community in your area, definitely with people who are of different denominations than you. I would say people who disagree with you theologically, begin to build relationships, whether it's coffee or lunch or conversations with people in your community. Whenever a disaster strikes, a hurricane comes through, some sort of freak flooding, some sort of world crazy event like a pandemic. You never know when you're going to need relationships and connections and people with your community in order to survive. So begin before you need them to build those relationships. And the third thing that I would say in building relationships is building relationships with people who are your age or your demographic who are not a part of your church. Begin to build and invest in relationships with people who are outside of your sphere of influence. One of the things that you learn very quickly in ministry is you and your spouse and family. There are no relationships in your congregation that are not transactional. Even your best friends in your congregation at the end of the day are transactional relationships. They are built upon what you do in ministry and what you do for them, and they see you as their pastor first, not their friend first, unless maybe that relationship precedes your time in that congregation by a long shot. Build relationships with people in your community, friendships with them, and don't build those relationships trying to get them to come to your church. You need them actually to be outside of your church. In fact, tell them not to come to your church, right? Like keep them away. If they want to come to Jesus, then tell them to come to Jesus in some other church. Like, or it's okay. I guess if they
Yeah.
do come to Jesus, they come to Jesus in your church. That's fine. But you're going to have to find some new friends that are outside of the church, so that you have connections and relationships that are outside of your context of sphere of ministry. And this is wise no matter what career field that you're in. You don't, if you're a salesperson, you don't always want to be hanging out with the salespeople at your company. You don't want to be friends with the people who you work with every single day and nobody else. It's just, it's pissing in the company pond. You don't want to do that. Like, right.
No, that's
Yeah,
so
that was,
good. Yeah, I love it. I wish I had done some of that. I did some of
you
it, but
do a
like
great
the
job of this. Like, especially I see you doing this a lot with building connections with people outside of your ministry sphere.
yeah,
And I've over the years just seen that the benefit that has paid off emotionally for you, relationally, even with you and your wife. So I am envious of that, but also I know how few pastors really end up having that, and it ends up that when
yeah.
there's
It's
trauma in one place or not, it's not healthy.
yeah. That I mean that was a piece of advice
So much
a mentor
loneliness.
a mentor of mine gave me was have friends outside the church, and at first I just was building relationships to get them to come to church, right, to grow my church.
That's the church planning thing, right?
Yeah,
Build a
yeah.
relationship with everybody. You got to get in the church.
But then as time went on, and they did come at various degrees, but as time went on, I actually enjoyed the friends who never came to my church the most because of what you said. I never had made that connection that your identity for them is always pastor first. And that's so true because I've been hurt. I was going to say this, you sparked it in my head. I've been hurt so many times by people that left my church. They didn't no longer wanted me to be their pastor, but it also meant that I was no longer their friend. And that
It
hurt me
hurts. It
deeply. Like,
hurts.
yeah, like for me, I could compartmentalize. Well, that's fine if you don't want to come to my church, but let's still be friends. And they couldn't get past that. They couldn't, for them, it didn't work. They couldn't separate the two. So I would be careful. Yeah, I completely agree. They don't see you as a friend. They see you as their pastor. And one day they will no longer want you to be their pastor. That
Yeah.
day will come.
And sadly,
And
this is the
so,
real truth. A lot of those people are your friends only because they know that it gives them greater standing in the church. And that's, I hate
yeah,
that,
very
but
good point.
I have
Yeah.
there have been so many people over the years who you've learned at the end of the day, it's like, okay, you really were only close to me or wanted to be close to me because of what the benefit to you in being that close to the senior pastor. Um, and you're right, it's
Yeah.
a harsh reality, the amount of trauma that comes in pastoring from rejection of friends, because we love hard as pastors, and we do create friendships, And it can be super rough in those moments if that is your only lifeline and connection to friendships and relationships or people inside of the church. You're headed for a lot of trauma that you didn't necessarily need to have.
Yeah, and the trauma thing is big to be aware of. Uh, as you do funerals, and especially the funerals and hospital visits, the painful pastoral things. Even so, I've noticed recently that even folks I don't really know, and I'm just there, but because like some form of trauma that is placed on you, because you as a pastor you enter into it, your empathy, your heart enters into their pain with them, and you need to recognize that sticks with you even when you walk away. And so to have a way to process through that stuff, I think pastors need to be aware of that. I made the mistake of thinking, oh, I've never known this person in my life, I'll be fine. I've cried more at those funerals of people I actually knew, right? So you get in it, and they don't talk about this in seminary. All of that stuff that just is just percolating. I know you've had some
Yeah.
traumatic experiences
Yeah.
as pastor as
You
well,
have you have to have a
and so
therapist,
like
a spiritual director, if you
yeah,
don't like the idea of counseling or therapy, which you're an idiot, but whatever.
yeah,
Be
yeah.
be an idiot, but find a spiritual director or find whatever title allows you to have somebody who's going to help you process through the trauma that comes not just from ministry, but as you said, compassion fatigue, from carrying the burdens of other people, and what they're going through. Those things sit and weigh on us in ways that we did not necessarily expect. And you and I mean, you're an 8, I'm somewhere on an 8 or a 9. Like we're both like, the most hard wall, challenging, like sometimes abrasive personalities that there can be out there. So if you and I are the ones who are saying we carry trauma and we experience fatigue and need therapy for the things that we have endured and gone through on behalf of and alongside other people, then certainly every pastor needs that. There's nobody who's immune to it if you and I aren't.
Yeah, no, yeah,
No offense, Matt.
no, I'm totally with you, man.
I mean, eights
It's
though. I mean, come on. If the Enneagram scale, eights are also the biggest teddy bears. Like out of all of the numbers of the nines, from 1 to 9, eights are, they may have that
yeah,
gruff. They may have that gruff face sometimes, but we're the biggest teddy bears. We're the softest on the inside.
that's true. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, I don't know the Enneagram that well, but like the cross one, I think is a 2.
From an
So
eight.
like from an 8, the triangle, I think it goes to 2, and so we when we are empathizing, we'll go to 2. So it makes sense. Um, that then our heart softens when we go in. Yeah, but it's so true, and that was something that surprised me as I got into pastoring. And if you're at a mega church, you may not ever experience that, because when I was an associate pastor at a mega church, I rarely did any of that stuff. But if you get into a parish and do a parish ministry, you're going to experience that, and it it'll surprise you what happens. So yeah, get a therapist, process all that.
Yeah.
Um,
So much of what
I
we talk
think
about seem to be like just being prepared, right? Like just be
yeah,
prepared.
yeah, be prepared. Um, and that inner soul, that inner spiritual life is so important. I was thinking about, because a lot of complaints I see from pastors, shifting topics a little bit here, is like worship ministry and worship teams can be like a big headache. Um,
What? Nah. as as
uh,
as a guy who came into pastoring from the creative side of things, yes, I can attest to the fact that the creative mind is sometimes very difficult to work with, and artists, musicians, of which I mean, I'm not a musician, but I am an artist. And so, yeah, I can see that. So, I have the moody difficulty of being worked with both on the creative side as well as on the pastor side. I can't work with pastors. Can't work with creatives. So I've got. No,
That's
you're right.
true. I forgot.
You're right
Yeah, you're
though.
part of it.
You're right though. There is oftentimes a lot of friction between visions, and yeah, yeah. So where you go with that one? Because
No,
I'm all in now.
yeah, I just want to give some advice on dealing with worship teams. I think and creatives. I like that word because it goes beyond just the musicians. I think you gotta work the inner soul care with them as well. Because yes, their visions are going to be very different than yours. And I think it's great that you were part of both sides because I think you realize that once you got to the pastoral side, you saw like the pastoral heart behind what that is versus like not everybody is like performance based, but a lot of the creatives, it's about showing off their performance, their creative side, all in the honor and glory of God. And so there's just this balance that you
Pastors
have to
do that too,
strike.
though. I mean, you're
Yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah,
exactly right, and I think a lot of pastors forget that what they're doing is performing as well.
yeah.
That there
No, it's
really
true.
isn't any
Yeah,
difference between how you preach. Like the why do we imitate Matt Chandler? Right? Why do we imitate
yeah,
Mark Driscoll? Because we look at them and naturally see, well, it's not their theology that I'm imitating. No, it's their presentation. It's their ability to capture people and say things in a way that's memorable and that moves. I'm moved by it, so I want to do that as well. And so I think,
yeah,
starting from a place, as you said, of recognizing that, yeah, artists are very much driven by performance in the worship team as well, and so am I, is maybe a starting place to beginning to have those conversations with them about what we're trying to do here and how we have to strike some sort of, I don't know, I guess a balance between um,
yeah,
presenting things in ways that are impactful, but also where the method doesn't become the message.
yeah. I think it's okay to have performance in the name of God, right? To
I
show
hope
off
so.
your
Yeah.
musical skills, your singing skills. But here's what I've learned over the years is that congregation people are smarter than a lot of times we give them credit for. And they pick up on the nuance of, is this performance coming from the heart and their love for Christ, or is it coming because they just want me to like them, right?
Humans
And think they're
mostly
awesome.
have a great built-in BS meter, and
Yes, they know.
they know.
Yeah. And so if your heart's not in the right place,
In
you
other
might get
people,
away with
we
it.
don't have a great built-in BS meter for our
No,
own
no,
BS. For everybody
no.
else's BS, we do, right?
Yeah, yeah, we do. We do. Yeah. So you might get away with it 1 or 2 weeks, but you're not going to get away with it long term if your heart's not in the right place. And so I think making sure your worship team, your creatives' hearts are connected to God. One of the best things I've done in any ministry is taking time as a pastor to pray with my creatives and like spend that time reminding them of why we're doing this, reminding them of what this is about. And I think that is helpful. And the more you can dive into leading in that way, I think the healthier your team's going to be. And you're going to deal with like some of the craziest stories I have of conflict are with the creatives.
Yeah.
Just just off the wall, like you can't even imagine like the stuff that happens, and the pettiness and all of that. And so I think you have to spend more time there. I don't think you can abdicate it. You can kick it to the curb, um, of their spiritual development, their spiritual health. I think that's so important.
Yeah.
Um, and that was something I know in the early days, I just focused on when I remember my first senior pastorate. I just hired this guy because he was a great worship leader, musician. He presented well. I didn't investigate the heart. None of that stuff really. And it was a mistake. It was the first guy I had to fire. in my life, and it was a hiring mistake that I made. That's what I told him when we had the conversation. It's actually my fault. I hired wrong, and so I learned a big lesson there. So um, I would encourage that. I don't know if you were leading quite the big team in Florida. I remember because you had a choir,
Yeah,
you had
yeah,
all
a couple,
sorts of creatives.
a couple of times, yeah, and that church was built on performance. It was everything in the facility was designed for performance. It was kind of a Crystal Cathedral, Norman Vincent Peale. Some people will recognize that name. Mindset where it really is all about the performance. It was about people coming in and experiencing joy and happiness and leaving having experienced that. And I don't want to say that that's wrong, but I just had a vision where we did a little bit more, maybe than just that. And one of the things that was difficult there in the beginning was trying to reframe the fact that we're not just here for performance. We're
Mm,
also here to accomplish something that hopefully goes just a little bit deeper than just walking out having had a happy hour on Sunday, but something that also affects change in the world and in them on Monday, on Tuesday. It was hard because I probably in some ways tried to turn those corners a little bit too quickly. There was some folks in the beginning, and a lot of them were extremely gracious. A lot of church really wanted it to have more substance, and so that was good. One of the things that I learned in that was maybe performance for the sake of performance isn't necessarily all bad. If you're in a situation where you have a performer, or you have somebody who may be a little bit too far on the side of performance, and not so much, on the side of discipleship ministry, trying to do more and go deeper. Find ways to allow both. I think to say, okay, there are going to be these moments where, okay, this is just here to show how great of a musician you are, or what we can do, and that's okay in doses. That's not okay if that's all we're giving people.
yeah, that's good. I like that. Um, yeah, I mean, you want people to shine their gifts, like the that runner, the quote, like, I feel God's pleasure when I run fast, right? I think we want to honor that. Like when people can play and sing and perform well, we want to honor that. But I think it's all about the heart, the motives behind it, um, and making sure those are right and spot on. And I think people will be gravitated towards that. So again, if you start with the right goal, I think the the stuff that you want, you desire more people to connect with God through our church will happen over time, but and you'll get there. So I've seen it, and so that's you said something too that I think kind of encapsulate all this is being patient. I like not changing things too quickly. It's really not worth it. I've learned over the years as eights, we're both eights, so we both like to change quick. You and I both can quickly change in our minds, in our hearts, and be there already, and
Yeah,
no one else is with us. No,
yeah,
I always think about it like we're on a speedboat, we're going, and then we realize, oh, we need to go that way, and we can change, and our bodies will move with the speedboat we're on, but the people on the boat with us, they're flying off, you know, because they can't stay on, and so
yeah. I
I
think I
think,
always changed everything too quickly. Even the things that I did slower, and that there were moments where even the board was begging me, please just change this. I'm like, the timing's not right. Even the things that I had drug on so long and talked about so much that everybody around me in leadership was saying, please just do this, we're tired of hearing about it, I still think was probably too fast, because
mm,
the people in the congregation weren't yet saying that to me. They weren't yet
yeah,
ready, even though everybody around. Bill Hybels, bless his soul, um, said your first day should last a year in ministry, which to me, probably a year is too soon. What he meant by that, whenever he said it, was don't make any changes, in the first year, and just sit and listen and learn about what's going on. You think you see correctly, you think you understand, you think you know. You don't know what you don't know. You don't see what you don't see. You have no idea what's behind all of those things that are there and in place. You don't know what drove them getting there, and you run the risk of making the wrong decisions or changing the wrong things at the wrong time, and making such that you just and the people who are telling you what to change, the people who are telling you this is the story, especially in the early days of a new call in a church, you're not getting the real story.
No,
You're not
no.
hearing from the right people. Uh, people who run to you first, those are the people you want to avoid and not listen to.
Yeah.
There's some advice for a new
That's a
pastor,
good,
right?
that, yeah, that
The,
is
the
great
the people
advice.
who
Yeah.
the people who are most worth listening to and have the truest stories to tell about what's going on in the church that you're in are going to be the last people to talk if they ever talk to you. Um, the people who run first, avoid.
Search committees. Every time the people that I enjoy the most on the search committees are the worst people when you get into the church. I've learned, or they're the most unhelpful. Maybe not the worst, but um, yeah, yeah, that's great advice. Very very practical advice, and I think it runs true for just about everybody. So yeah, you got. I love that. I wish I would have known that. I mean, in church planning, you're kind of just there's no tradition or history. My first senior pastor role was a church planner, and I think identifying every church planner has a core team of people that you're gathering, identifying where they're at, what their ministry background it is, and then changing their kind of mindset slowly as
Yeah.
well. I think that's a learning I wish I had done. Um,
Yeah. One of the things I think
in
about
those days.
planning that
Yeah.
looks, the grass is always green on the other side. But one of the things I think about church planning that kind of plays into this is church planning is always about addition rather than usually subtraction early on, at least. And unfortunately, whenever you come into an established congregation, a lot of pastors come in looking at things that need to be subtracted or changed, and they spend their time doing those things rather than addition. And I wish that I had walked into congregations simply saying, hey, what can we add here, and ignoring
Mm,
as much as possible things that I thought needed to be changed or needed to be deleted. uh, and
that's
and
good.
by
Yeah.
ignored, I don't mean like for a few months, I don't mean for like a few years, I mean like till year 7 or 10. you know
Yeah.
like I mean a really really long time. um American churches try to move too quickly, and so do their pastors, especially young pastors.
Yeah, I made that mistake here. I mean, not to make excuses, but we had a pandemic. But I think that for some folks, it hurt all the changes we had to make from that, and then the changes back, the whiplash of all of that. It was stark, and so I agree. Like, move very slow. Add. I like that. I like that. Add. Don't subtract. Just keep doing the basics of the church and then add some stuff and call them experiments. We're just going to try this for a couple months and see how it goes. And then we'll reevaluate, like give people all sorts of off ramps, even the stuff you're adding. Don't make it seem like it's a permanent ad. Like just,
I love that. Larry
it,
Osborne, I think,
yeah,
is who I first heard say something like that.
yeah, somebody,
um
yeah,
yeah, don't ask for permission, don't ask for buy-in. um Ask for permission, to do something. Essentially, get people to let you try something rather than asking them to buy into it. And I always
yeah,
thought that that was good advice, because until people see something and see its effect, they're not going to put their neck on the line. Usually, they're not going to buy into something. But most congregations, most boards will allow you to try something, to experiment. So,
yeah, they will.
if you sell, pardon the term, something new, a new discipleship thing or a new, community initiative, ask for permission rather than buy-in.
Yeah. I've never been told no when I present it as a like experiment. Let's just try it for a little bit. I give them a start and an end, then where we'll reevaluate to see if we want to continue it, and that always works. And sometimes, actually, I realize, yeah, I don't want to keep doing this. This is not going to work. So I'm glad I didn't act like this was going to be a long term thing. and then sometimes everybody sees, oh, this is pretty cool. Let's keep doing this. Let's lean into it. So, yeah, I think the slow change is important for the young bucks. Which is why, going back to your point about the mentors, having different mentors, they can help you stay the course in that area, and not, go to them for advice, lean into that stuff. That'll be very helpful.
Yeah. And everybody's like
Get it.
following the conference circuit, like whatever, Matt Chandler, Mark Driscoll, John MacArthur, I don't even know who the names are, now Josh Howerton or Andy Stanley. Like, these people aren't your mentors. Like,
Nah.
they're not, reading their books is not, I mean, I'm talking about somebody who's a nobody, whenever I talk
Yeah.
about getting to know some senior pastor, and by that I mean senior in age.
Yeah.
But
No, you're right.
who's a nobody, but probably who knows more about ministry in their pinky than Andy Stanley, John MacArthur, Chuck Swindoll, or me. No.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. Those big mega church guys, they don't really know what it's like to pastor.
It's very different. I have no ability in the churches that I have pastored to tell you how to pastor a church your size, Matt, because I have never pastored a church your size. I pastored a plant, one smaller than the one that you're currently in, but I've not been in your size of church. I have no ability to navigate, in a wise way what you navigate there. And so, Andy Stanley does amazing things, but Andy Stanley can't tell you in your church size what you should do unless you have a 30,000 member church. Then maybe Andy Stanley is going to be some help, to you in navigating. Give Andy a call, okay? I've got his email address and phone number. I'll give it to you.
Yeah, when you get to 30,000, then Andy would be a good mentor for you. No, that's good. That's a good word. That's a big mistake, because you try to be, just the idea of trying to be something you're not, I think, is a huge mistake that most young pastors make. So yeah, hopefully they'll listen. I doubt it, but
I don't know what else is on your list, but I wanted to make sure, because we've talked about around this idea of trauma and health, spiritual health. I think for a young pastor, putting practices in place early on that are spiritually life-giving to you is important. I did not do a good job of this. I saw my study for sermons and for Bible studies as being my spiritual investment in myself. And it was that, but it wasn't enough. I quickly realized that when I was in worship, I wasn't able to worship. So, I had to find other things. Lifting for me became a sanctuary, became my place of prayer. Eventually I found that spiritual retreats, were kind of a requirement for me, going away, disconnecting, in a silent monastery was going to be important for me. Experiencing liturgy in other ways, churches that were unlike mine, where I didn't have any opinion on how it should be done because I didn't understand it. So something that was totally just different in the way it ran and the way it operated liturgically was important for me. But investing in yourself spiritually long before you ever feel like your tank is empty, I think, is important. The other thing that I was going to say as well, I think we would be remiss in not saying this here on this show, is physically taking care of yourself. I know that, both you and I over the years have struggled with our physical body and treating it with the same love, care, and respect that we treat our physical bodies. And, I think for a young pastor, putting something in place that stays in place to keep us healthy physically is important. So many pastors, from the stress and trauma that happen just as a natural byproduct of doing the easiest levels of ministry, we carry that with us, and it causes us oftentimes to abuse our bodies in ways that just aren't healthy. And so, you don't have to be neurotic about it like me, but doing something, rather than nothing, joining a local gym and actually going there, finding, some way to take care of yourself physically I realized, and I've been transparent with this story over the years, I realized that I was preaching to other people about discipline spiritually while doing so from the most undisciplined looking body there in front of them. Like, why would anybody listen to me about disciplining yourself and following structures and doing these things spiritually when it's very clear from looking at me that I have absolutely no discipline in my own life. And so that was just kind of a wake up call to say, I think that I don't want people necessarily looking to me as an example, but I have to also understand that people do look at me and how I am spiritually, how I am with my family, and how I am physically. It communicates something to them about what I prioritize. And I needed to make some changes.
Amen. Yeah, agree 100%. I think I had a mentor early on with that, but he said you need to do something outside of this ministry that gives you wins, all right? That gives you confidence, that gives you, relief. And so, having that outside hobby and that's active that you can use your
Something like
competitive,
punching, boxing,
yeah,
MMA, something where you're
anything.
beating something up, right?
Yeah, golf. I mean,
I can't.
literally
Yeah, that's good.
anything.
I cannot
Yeah,
hit a congregant, but I can hit a golf ball.
yeah. It was great advice because I started with golf. Actually, I call them my prayer walks, and then eventually lifting and all of that. So and running. So I think, yeah, I'm 100%. It's very helpful um, to keep sane. So and all the you named it. You named it. So you were preaching to me. I received it. Um,
It's a daily battle for all of it.
yeah.
Don't give up.
All right. Yeah. All right.
All right, you ready?
Show.
All right, let's do it. Here we go. So here we are in the after show, the part of the show where Matt and I've taken to calling it confession. I come to confession and I confess to Matt all of my sins in physicality and fitness for the week.
Yeah. So it's your birthday. So
yeah,
calories don't count on your birthday, right?
Unfortunately they do. I told my wife, I was like, I know, but can we move my birthday to to the day where I have a high carb day? I think I have maybe 1 or 2 high carb days left before the show in a few weeks. And she was like, no, we can't. I'm like, okay. She was like, you're seriously not going to eat cake on your birthday? And I was like, I have literally spent like years, and unfortunately like this final run of a couple of weeks comes like right on my birthday, and I would, but I don't want to ruin, like, I'll take a bite of cake.
Celebrate your birthday November 15th.
Yeah, I say, there you go. I say, I would love to take a bite of cake, and I will, but I'd much rather just eat the whole piece. And can I not eat it in a few days on my high carb day? And we've got football and kid stuff tonight. Let's just do it all. It's just like, okay, well, maybe we can do both. Maybe we can move some things, and I can give you, I should have had the picture. She said, so, I come and I find when I wake up this morning, some things that I can eat with a note that says, happy birthday. Here's some things you can eat. And it's a tin of almonds and a large jar of dill pickles. So instead of cake on my birthday, I'm going to be sitting there eating a kosher dill pickle. So I text my coach and I'm like, I am dying of hunger, which is absolutely true right now. Like, I am dying of hunger. And I was like, what are your thoughts on pickles? And I don't know if you have ever looked at the nutritional facts on pickles, but like, you look at it and it's like nothing on there. Yeah. I think the largest pickle you can find is like 15 calories or something. Yeah. So he responds back and it's like, I'm pretty flexible with you, but no, man up. Um, no, you're not allowed to have a pickle. Well, I'm literally eating the pickle at that moment. Uh, and this is what he says. He was like, instead of a pickle, 15 calories. He's like, I suggest, no lie, sugar-free gum, water, or just going outside and breathing air. So the thoughts that went
Oh.
through my mind in that moment were very unholy. And so,
What's
okay,
wrong with
so
the pickle though? Sodium? The sodium in it?
I think it's honestly just I think he's probably afraid of how many pickles I'll have. You know, they add up. I don't know. So okay,
Yeah.
I am allowed a shake before I work out and after I work out to give me just enough carbs to get through. And it's like 10 carbs. And 10 carbs is like nothing. If you have
Yeah.
a healthy protein bar, like 10 carbs is like it's like an inch of that bar, like not the whole bar.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like an inch of the bar. So I'm like, okay, I have this powder that I put into a mix in, and it tastes as you might imagine it would taste, like the seventh circle of hell. A flavored seventh circle of hell flavored
Yeah.
orange.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I look at this and it's like, okay, this is 10 carbs before the workout that I'm allowed to have, and 10 carbs after the workout that I'm allowed to have. But I have these. Actually, I have these pumpkins that are 8 carbs. So if I eat one pumpkin before the workout and one pumpkin after the workout, I'm getting, yeah, there's nothing else in there. It's just carbs. I'm getting all the carbs. In fact, I'm actually under my carbs because I'm allowed 10 and I get 8 out of one. So I, on my birthday, ate one pumpkin before my workout this morning. And there was one waiting for me in the car after my workout that I ate. And so I don't want to say screw you to my coach, but I think that's kind of what I did. Yeah, so I'm in the middle. Next week is actually supposed to be Hell Week, where the carbs get zeroed out. Apparently, my wife's like, "You're really going to eat zero carbs next week?" I think he's serious. That I think the only carbs I'm going to get are the ones that are just accidentally in chicken, or
Yeah.
what I'm doing. So, yeah, this week though is purgatory. It's about 20. It's about a dozen, 2 dozen carbs, about a couple of dozen carbs a day.
Wow.
Uh,
So you're in
all
ketosis.
all day. Yes, and very much in ketosis because he wants to dig out the rest of my body fat. I'm like, you're going to be digging me out of the ground by the end of two, two,
Yeah.
2 weeks of this, or you're going to be digging yourself out of the ground because I'm going to found you and murdered you for this chaos. But it's like you're at something like 10% body fat, but that's not good enough, right? Like you've got to be transparent. They've got to be able to see through you on stage or nobody's happy. There, that's my life, and I'm whining, and you're just gonna have to listen to it for a few more weeks until it's over and I get carbs
Yeah,
back.
I can't wait. We'll have to have a beer together on the show when you're
I,
done.
that's a great idea. Let's we will do we
Yeah.
can I have a cigar too? I
Yeah,
don't
let's
am I
do
allowed to
that.
have do cigars have carbs? Am I allowed to smoke? I don't know. I'm not gonna ask.
You could totally have a cigar.
Yeah.
There's no calories in that.
We'll do that. We'll have a beer or whiskey or something on after the show. I would love that. how,
Yeah.
how that there's my trauma. How are you?
uh yeah, about the same. Same as last week. I need to get better on the weekends. I do pretty good in the week and not disciplined on the weekends. It's mostly because I'm so busy with the kid stuff. It's just grabbing whatever we
Grab and
can.
go, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, the workouts were weaker last week. I only had time for a few. I did three. I mean, you would like it. I did three bodybuilding workouts, which was nice. Um, but I did not run this past week, and I have a race coming up.
Ooh.
So I hurt my foot, so I took the week off, and I need to get back into it. Yesterday, I was helping a buddy move stuff out of Manhattan into New Jersey, so that was a good kind of just general exercise day, and lifting heavy stuff. That's why I get called because I'm jacked. People know it. Hey, Murph will come help us lift this heavy thing. So that's what I
I,
did yesterday.
you should start charging for that.
I did.
Nice.
He did. He paid me. Yeah,
That's
he's
awesome.
generous.
At least that.
Yeah,
That's good.
yeah. So I need to run this week and see how my foot responds. We'll see. Um, I was feeling good until my foot got hurt. I was feeling good about where I was at. So hopefully I'm still there. Hopefully I didn't lose too much in 1 week. But we'll find out
Well, I know a good
tomorrow.
PT surgeon if you need
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
I hopefully you won't, man. I hope that gets
Uh,
better. It's no fun.
yeah, yeah. It's just I went. I talked to the PT guy at our gym, and he's saying that it's connected. Basically, I just need to stretch better before I run. It's all connected to like my hip and my knee, and then it goes down to the foot. And when you're running, it's so repetitive over and over again that when your body's not loose enough, then it causes that. So I'm working on it. I'm getting old, man. So
It happens. You'll learn and
yeah,
find. Oh, I do need to start doing stretching. Same thing with me, man. Same thing with me.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's me. Um, yeah, I'm not as like cranky as you, although I haven't
I'm very
eaten
cranky.
anything.
Yeah, I'm
I
very
have
cranky.
not eaten. I have not eaten today,
I'm smiling a
and that's
lot, but it's only because I'm just very angry. So it's like I'm just going to smile in the middle
no.
of my
I can
anger.
feel. I
Yeah.
can feel it through the smile.
But it's gonna
I'm.
get
I'm
worse.
really. I'm really done with this. I'm done.
You can see it in the eyes. My family's like, just eat a cracker or something, please. Something, anything.
Yeah, I'm surprised on the pickles though, because the pickles are like the diet set. That's what when I'm on a real strict thing. Even now, I have pickles in the fridge, and when I'm hungry and I don't want to eat a snack, I just eat a pickle,
Yeah.
and it works.
Yeah.
So
I don't know.
that's yeah. That's
I
I bet it's got to be the sodium that it'll flood your muscles with water. I don't know. Uh,
I'm sure there's a reason. Maybe I'll do a story or something on it. I'm always looking for content, Matt. Everything's content.
no, it's true.
All
Linseed
right.
said it.
Well, if I'm here next week and not in jail because I've gotten so angry that I've done something,
Yeah.
then I'll see a week from now. We'll see how
All
much
right.
worse I am then.
All right.
Take care, man.
Enjoy.